Jonathan Joestar was just a boy when he met him, just a boy clutching to his father. It was a day just like any other, at least any other before Dio came along. Even now, that was what he thought of it as. It was before the Belmonts were chased away. But the Belmonts at this time still weren't popular, not even close. They had done the job of protecting the world a little too well. The world forgot it even needed protecting. Most people these days just saw the Belmonts as undeserving nobles, relics of an old age that needed to be tossed out with the past. But his father never saw them that way. There are many today, Jonathan, who do not deserve what they have, his father had told him. Those who have seemingly infinite resources but do nothing as the world burns down around them, and yet they are revealed. The Belmonts are the opposite. Jonathan still remembered the earnest look in his father's eyes when he said that, a look that radiated his heartbreak at the situation. The men and women of the Belmont clan have worked tirelessly to defend their people. They have done a thankless job over and over again, and it is likely that they will continue to do so. The Joestars are often believed to be cursed. So many in our family die young, but it takes a special kind of person to bring a curse upon themselves. These people are true nobles, Jonathan. Jonathan idolized that family since those words were spoken to him. His eyes lit up just thinking about them. What it sounded like they were heroes. Heroes who barely got any support from people these days. Heroes who were hunted down by their neighbors every day. The Joestars were some of the last remaining supporters of the Belmonts, especially those from aristocracy. And sure as his father's description of them, the Belmonts made sure to show their appreciation every time he met them in person. They were always polite, kind, and courteous, even when there were fewer and fewer of them to be that way. George Joestar would continue meeting with the head of the Belmont clan over the years, until eventually those meetings stopped. On that day, the Belmonts and the Joestars parted, and on that day, the last day they met, a young Jonathan Joestar saw the youngest son of the Belmont clan. A boy that he didn't get a good enough look at, and a boy that he had only now seen for the first time. Someone he wouldn't see for years soon after. Trevor Belmont. He was a bit older than Jonathan, maybe a year or two. He hadn't said anything when they first met. Jonathan meant to, but he just looked at the boy's eyes and looked away. There was something in them, something a lot harder than Jonathan had. It was a boy who had already seen too much, and Jonathan did want to reach out to him, to help him, to talk to him, but just didn't know how. And by the time he had figured it out, Trevor Belmont had already walked away from his life, so he let the boy go out in the world. As he heard about the Belmont's continued decline, he always regretted that decision. He always felt like he could have done more, but he was sure that he would never meet Trevor Belmont again. But fate had other plans. A 20-year-old Jonathan Joestar stared at the man in front of him. The ordeal with Dio had seemed like it was forever ago, but in actuality it was only a few days. I reject my humanity, Jojo. The haunting voice echoed in his ears. Dio was so sure of himself, so pure in his intention. There was a tone of destruction underneath his voice before Dio even put on the mask. But no matter what Dio had ever done to him, Jonathan always believed that there could be better underneath, and he had been proven very wrong, at the cost of his father's life. But he was sure it was over. But this man, Baron William Zeppeli, told him differently. This battle of yours isn't over. Dio, the masked master, has departed, he told Jonathan calmly, as though this wasn't earth-shattering news. And unfortunately, the news only got worse from here. He, however, is the least of your concern, young man, Zeppeli stated, leaping into the air and landing on the ground in the perfect seated position. The least of my concern? Jonathan asked earnestly. I don't see how that could possibly be the case. What Dio turned into hasn't been seen and... Exactly. Zeppeli raised a finger to the air, drawing Jonathan's eyes towards him. Jonathan felt his heart hold in his chest, waiting patiently for the other shoe to drop. I can assure you that the vampires went nowhere. The Belmonts did a very good job in this region, to be sure. So good that every vampire worth his salt knows not to do anything within Europe. Or at least they did, until the Belmonts went away. Then the bloodsuckers just stayed out of the open, until recently. You've been so caught up in your own corner of the world that you neglected to look at others. He handed Jonathan what appeared to be a newspaper. Jonathan glanced closely at the headline. In bright, bold letters, an ominous message spread. Dark mass spreads across the sky. London holds its breath while Europe goes dark. William carefully watched Jonathan as he read those words, carefully studying the boy for his reaction. And that reaction didn't take long to bubble to the surface. It was primarily confusion, so he thought he'd clear things up. Newspapers don't appear to see a pattern, but I do, and a very clear one at that. The areas affected appear to be spread around Wallachia. There's a straight line from here to that city. About a year ago, that city did just about the worst thing it could do. It provoked the Lord of the Vampires, who had since been in retirement. It started what appears to be Dracula declaring war on the human race. Most vampires seem to be taking that to heart. They're converging, and it seems that this Dio is moving towards them. Jonathan paused. Dio was such a proud man. When he looked at him in the eyes and he told him that he had rejected everything that made him human, he did so because Dio believed himself to be above humans. Dio saw himself as a king. Jonathan didn't think he would just go kneel before anybody else. He didn't see it. But it barely mattered if he didn't see it. He couldn't just let it go. If there even was a possibility of other people being in danger, if there was even the slightest chance, what am I to do about it? He asked, gripping a branch next to him. His mind was deep in thought. He knew what he had to do. He had to find Dio. He just didn't know what came next. William Zeppeli, on the other hand, smiled. He watched the boy, not even trained in hormone, as the pure life energy from his fingertips resuscitated a dying branch. If he could manage to gather this boy, bring him together, and if his vision of the future was indeed true and he was able to find the last son of Belmont again, a person that he hadn't seen in over a decade, they might just stand a chance. Might. I'll tell you what you're going to do, Jonathan Joestar. You're going to come with me. You already prevailed against a vampire once, even if he was an inexperienced one. Imagine what you could do if you go even further. He pointed at Jonathan, arching his back as he did. Jonathan Joestar, you have an appointment with fate, and I'm here to help you keep it. Dio Brando scoffed under the cover of night. His body was covered in scars from the burn wounds he had received from Jonathan. He still hadn't managed to fully recover, but he was well on his way, especially with the aid of his new minions. He would have to hurry and leave the city, at least that was the initial plan. Leave and find a location that he could call his own, conquer, and inevitably wait for Jojo to show up. Then he would have his vengeance. But plans always had a funny way of changing on him, especially when other vampires got involved. He didn't even know there were any other active vampires outside of himself. He was mostly sure the Belmonts got them all, but there was living proof to the contrary right in front of him, and he was very sure of himself. He walked up to Dio with no hesitation, like a thing like him had any right being in Dio's presence. And what was worse, he had the audacity to talk to Dio like he was his underling. This was despite the fact that Dio was nice enough to go out of the way to show people his status. He was being carried around in the throne, for goodness sake. He couldn't get much more obvious than that. Oh, a new blood, the creature before him snarled. He had a crew with him too, easily a dozen or so vampires, and he seemed very proud of that fact. But if Dio had to guess, that was all he had. Come to pay your respects to the new King of London. Almost immediately, Dio suppressed a laugh. The king, you say? Well, I already had to make my way through this shithole, the other vampire countered. I figured I might as well claim it as my own, unless you have objections. Dio smiled as he shook his head. It's going to be an interesting conversation. You might as well let it play out a little longer. Very well then, I'll take these men as your offerings, he said, more as a statement than anything else, waving to the underlings carrying Dio's throne. Dio smiled and didn't say anything else, as he put his head in his palm and patiently waited for the man to continue. I'll take your silence as recognition of your place in the grand scheme of things, in which case it's a pleasure to have you on board, but I'll have to be going soon. If you want, you're welcome to stay in the city. I'll have somebody look after you, back to welcome you properly. He sneered, the slightest bit of his fang now shining under the moonlight. Well, my, that is a generous offer, Dio said, directly addressing the man. Not because the man had done anything to impress him, but rather because he had actually, inadvertently, said something interesting. And where does the new King of London have to be hurrying off to so soon? The vampire in front of Dio smiled greatly, almost like he was looking for the opportunity to show off a little bit. Dio had to keep himself from smirking too widely. No one should show their hand that quickly, after all. Well, you're clearly newer than I thought. Only a young vampire wouldn't have heard the shot heard around the world, the rallying cry for all of vampire kind. He said, leaning towards Dio, almost like he was trying to hear him better. Dio chose to ignore the affront to his personal space for now. I don't believe I've heard of any such thing. Please do your best to enlighten a beginner. Dio gestured with his right hand gently, almost hypnotically. The vampire before him almost felt swayed by the pull, like a moth toward a glowing flame. Like a moth, he should have recognized the danger of the fire presented to him. Lord Dracula, the man responded instead. At this point in the man's mind, he wasn't sure if he was saying it because he wanted to or because it had been pulled out of him. He chose to act like it was the former. It's called a conference of every important vampire on the continent. Something of utmost importance, evidently. A final war against the human race. He smiled. Just think of it, the new world order that will be applied after we win. Vampires is the dominant species on the planet, as we were always meant to be. Final war? Dio asked. He paused and thought. As far as he knew, nothing was ever final, except for death. And what preceded this announcement? He said, a bit of anger seeping into his voice. The indignity that somebody might be screwing up the world before he had gotten a chance to rule it had just been too much. The vampire across from Dio paused. At this point, he was starting to sense the pure malice radiating from the man before him. I don't believe I like your tone. He waved his hand for his vampires to commence bearing down on Dio. In his mind, it was time to stop humoring the man. If he didn't teach Dio his place in the world very soon, it was likely that he would try to usurp him. Unfortunately for this vampire, Dio was already above him. Somebody was humoring somebody. It was just the other way around. Dio raised his hand as his minion fled from his side in a blur of light. In an instant, every vampire that was sent after him was crushed to dust. Some quite literally, from the waves that poured out from the sides of the street. Dio wasn't a stupid man. He knew there were likely more vampires in the world. Even if he suspected the Belmonts killed them all, it wasn't like he wasn't going to plan for the eventuality of running into another one. So he had to make sure he had more minions, more underlings. He was planning on building them up a lot more before this, but it looked like they had been tested just a bit earlier than he had intended. They were performing swimmingly, though. For a moment, Dio considered taking this man's underlings before him, but his vampires were clearly far superior. They had taken apart his forces in a matter of minutes. Maybe Dio just had better choice. Dio Brando always did settle for nothing but the best of the best, those who were interesting enough to be in his presence. This man must have just turned people he stumbled into on the street. How dull. The vampire before him, the one who, in Dio's eyes, had the gall to call himself the King of London when he was sitting before a true king, launched towards Dio. Clearly the lesson of what had happened to his subordinates hadn't breached his brain yet. His skull must have been a bit too thick. Fortunately for him, Dio was more than in the mood to teach him. He didn't even get out of his seat. Rather, Dio simply cocked his head to the side and opened his eyes widely. A concentrated beam of energy shot out of them, directly piercing into the vampire's throat and his heart. He looked surprised, as though he didn't realize Dio himself could do something like that. Was this not something normal vampires could do? Dio pondered to himself. He knew how vampires were normally turned from legends. A simple bite or drinking vampire blood, but he had been turned by a mask. He had never heard of anything like that before. So, was he special? He shook his head. It was a silly question. Of course he was special. Did the mask somehow make him more special than he thought himself as? That was better phrasing. It would explain why his minions were so much more potent than the others, why they were stronger. Perhaps they were simply made by a higher caliber of vampire. Which of course meant that the mask made higher calibers of vampire. The mask that just so happened to fall into his lap. Fate truly did favor Dio Brando. He gestured with a finger for his servants to lower him to the ground. As his seat touched the ground, he gently got up, leaning towards the now fallen vampire. It's become clear to me now that I'm a step above you, or rather that you're several steps beneath me. I could heal a wound like this in a matter of moments. He pointed at the hole to the so-called King of London's throat. But how long will it take you? I do hope it's not long. I would prefer to hear what you have to say. Might be difficult to hear that without a throat in hand. What are you? The vampire's voice came out a garbled mess. It was barely understandable under the waves of blood pushing down his throat, almost like a person trying to speak underwater. Luckily for Dio, he was experienced in listening to people who he thought were beneath him. In fact, Dio often thought that listening to normal people might as well have been listening to animals, yet he understood them nonetheless. Understanding this buffoon shouldn't have been too much of a challenge for him. Good, so your vocal cords do still work. Dio put his hand on the side of the man's face. You must have some amount of willpower to keep talking. There must be a man worth something in you after all. Shame you're already a vampire. I might have had use of someone like you as an underling, had I turned you myself, of course. But there's no use in dwelling on the past. So, since you think yourself a king, give me your last royal address. Explain to me, what provoked this Dracula into the so-called final war? The vampire had some pride left in him, but that pride soon faded away as he saw the shadows gathering around Dio. The followers who had torn his followers asunder. He was in no place to disobey. The strongest got the others in line. That was how vampires lived. A priest in Wallachia took Dracula's bride, burned her at the stake. Dio clicked his tongue. Sentiment. He understood emotions very well. You have to understand them in order to play people properly. The same thing that he had done to Jonathan for years. And killing someone's wife, especially if that someone was as powerful as this Dracula was, people had a knack for not being rational when they were angry in Dio's experience. And rage was the most powerful of emotions. It was something that continued on, even long after the initial event had faded. The final war. Those words played in Dio's head again. The last pieces slid into place, meant to exterminate the human race. Which of course was a double-edged sword. Sure, vampires would feed gloriously for the first few years, but after that it would be a slow and painful death. The act of a desperate man flipping a table when he loses his game. If the man wanted to drag himself to the pits of hell, that was fine with Dio, but he sure as hell wasn't going to be brought down with him. Thank you, Your Majesty. Dio smiled as he brought his foot down onto the vampire's chest cavity. He screamed in pain until Dio shot another beam directly through his head, slicing upwards and ripping his brain in half. He turned to his underlings. Take his remains. If he's anything like me, he'll pull himself together soon enough. That wouldn't be ideal. So make sure they're tied together, and make sure they're as well binded as possible. We need to give our friend one last glimpse of the sunrise. Dio's minions bowed before him, before they dragged away the corpse into the walkways of the streets. One of Dio's soldiers kneeled before his master. Shall I assume this is to mean that we should take this as planned? The vampire asked, his palms pressed against the cobblestone ground. Through its connection with his soldiers, he could feel their eagerness. It was amusing to Dio. It was almost a shame that he wasn't going to be able to follow through with the majority of their urges. No, something far more interesting is happening. Dio grinned widely. It would seem that the position of Lord of the Vampires is about to be up for grabs. His soldier looked to him, confusion evident on his face. Of course he's confused, Dio thought. Brilliance is often confusing to the non-informed. Dio cleared his throat as he talked. My empire needs to be much bigger than I initially thought it would, and it can't get bigger if I'm over here supervising such a small corner of the world. We're going to be traveling to Wallachia. You'll have many more fellow soldiers by the time we're there. Not to mention you'll have some good meals between now and then. The shadow over Dio's servant hid his face as he grinned. Dio himself continued onward. Burn everything in the city to the ground, but don't kill anyone you find. I need to make more minions. A massacre isn't conducive to the formation of an army. We'll also be needing to make several stops along the way to Wallachia. We don't want to show up to Count Dracula's door empty-handed now, do we? He grinned as his ears perked up. He heard the screams of a young woman echoing through the city. In that moment, he remembered something about a serial killer wandering about. Someone who had apparently only targeted women. Someone the media had dubbed Jack the Ripper. He had a paltry body count, especially when compared to Dio's own numbers, but he seemed ruthless enough for Dio to at least use for the time being. Well, I need someone to take charge of the territories I conquered. Might as well get started now. Jonathan walked with William Zeppeli at his side, and Speedwagon, who had insisted on coming with them, trailing behind. All the while, he was trying to breathe in a way that deeply made him uncomfortable. This hormone training was extremely straining on himself. It just didn't feel natural to breathe in this manner. But he could already feel the energy coursing through his body in doing so, and that made it all worth it. Or at least, it had to make it all worth it, because he had seen the aftermath of Dio's presence. They had just gotten off their boat outside of the United Kingdom a few hours ago, and Jonathan was already wishing deeply that he hadn't. It wasn't a pretty sight. They hadn't come across any living city for the last hour. All of them looked like they had been completely torn apart by some great conflict. But human war couldn't have been this complete. Dio? Jonathan gritted his teeth as he walked through what had to be the fourth city on their journey since they had touched down on the mainland. The worst part of it was that they hadn't seen any vampires, at least not any powerful ones. Grunts here and there who knew nothing of Dio's current location. Every second they waited to find Dio was another second that some family, some person, was being torn apart by this monstrous horde. It certainly didn't help that even from the ship he could see swarms of creatures covering the sky. He could see spots where fluffy white clouds should be replaced by dark shadows. "Is everything alright, my boy?" William asked at his side. "I don't believe I could see how any of this would be alright," Jonathan replied earnestly. William nodded. He sometimes forgot, because Jonathan was so adept at using Hamon, that the boy wasn't a warrior. William himself had seen more than enough things like this in his time. In fact, the only thing that bothered him about this sight now was the fact that he wasn't at all bothered by it. "I cannot live with this injustice," Jonathan continued. "Every minute, nay, every second we're out here, something horrible is happening to another innocent. Men, women, and children." He clenched his fist, Speedwagon putting a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Joestar," he said earnestly, "we can get to the bottom of this. No great pain in the world lasts forever." Jonathan smiled at Speedwagon's word. Just a small amount. He didn't necessarily believe them at the moment, but he really wanted to, so he forced himself to. "Thank you, my friend." He gave a small smile. If anything else, he wasn't alone, even if on some level it did feel like it from time to time. Speedwagon couldn't fight these beasts, as much help as he was in other ways. And though William Zeppeli was a great help in that category, and a great mentor, he just felt distant to him in some way. He was very professional. He taught Jonathan. He instructed him. He fought side by side with him when necessary. But they didn't really have any conversations outside of that. He only told Jonathan what he needed to know in the moment, more an instructor than a comrade. William straightened himself up as Jonathan thought. "We need to keep moving. There's nobody to save in this city. Every minion has likely moved on." He glanced back at Jonathan, with very little emotion on his face. Jonathan began to nod, only for the look on Speedwagon's face to stop him in his tracks. "Jojo! That sound!" Speedwagon exclaimed, as he pointed in a direction far away from them. It was just past the city's edge, on the path from the remnants of the entrance to the city. In other words, it was just within earshot. Zeppeli closed his eyes to listen further. Jonathan soon did the same. There was nothing for a while, just a long stretch of silence, and then they finally heard it. The sound of a child. "No! Stop! Get away!" The small, high-pitched voice wailed. Clearly they hadn't gotten away from everything. There were still monsters left here. William looked to Jonathan. "Go," he ordered. However, he wasn't moving from the spot. Was this just like the wine test? Something Jonathan had to do on his own? Or did Zeppeli have some kind of plan? He looked completely calm at the moment. Unfortunately, Jonathan had no way of knowing. And in the current moment, he didn't have time to wait for an explanation. His feet hit the pavement, the demolished buildings of the city, the broken bodies on the ground, the blood soaking through the floor beneath him. All of that faded away in a blur. He developed a kind of tunnel vision, the only thing that dropped into his perception being what was directly in front of him, the direction the sound was coming from. He got close enough to the point that even the rubble of the city was starting to disappear from his view line. He got close enough to where he actually saw the child. It was a young boy, crouched on the outskirts of the city. He looked like he was covered in dirt, like he had been traveling for a while, probably wandering around in a stupor. He must have been desperate to move, Jonathan thought. There was no way he was from the city. The dirt clung to his shirt had to have been clung there for miles and miles on end. Maybe he had come for help? But instead he found the creatures now lumbering above him, 2 of them from the looks of things. One of them was smaller than the other, but still massive. Even without their vampirism, it still looked like he possessed extraordinary strength. The ground seemed to be parting ways for the vampire in a way that it didn't for other people. It was squeezing out of the way, as though it was being bared down upon by a horse's hoof. Right behind the vampire, there was a creature that was nearly twice its size. It looked like even its muscles had muscles. The other creature wasn't only not human, but it wasn't a vampire. It was gigantic, monstrous, almost bestial in nature. Its wings trailed behind it like a cloak. It was almost like something a royal would wear to announce their presence, only this was a part of its body. It reached its hand forward, and even its hand didn't look right. Its nails were replaced with long, claw-like appendages as it reached towards the child's throat, only to get batted away by the vampire. The two were fighting each other. They weren't on the same side. Infighting amongst this apocalyptic horde? Makes sense for a moment. But then a thought struck Jonathan. This Dio's person? Was it fighting Dracula's, perhaps? He was right. Dio wouldn't kneel to anybody else. It didn't matter in the moment. Even if they were fighting, they were both after the child. Wouldn't be too long before they achieved their goals. Even running as fast as he could, there wasn't time to stop it. He didn't know how he could. He tried channeling hormone into his legs, forcing them to move more efficiently, but even that would take time, and it looked like he didn't have it. But he was still going to try. He breathed, letting the energy flow through his system, and forced to push through his feet. His speed doubled, then tripled in that brief moment, but he still wasn't fast enough. He played through 1,000 different scenarios in his head, and all of them, he was just a second too late. He wanted to close his eyes, to shield himself from the horror he was about to witness, but his eyes saw something before he could do that. It was the flinging of a whip. The small brown tendril wrapped around one of the creature's throats and pulled it backward. It pulled the vampire with enough force that his feet flew into the air. Jonathan took this strange surprise as an opening. He leaped towards the much larger creature and clenched his fist. Sunlight Yellow Overdrive! His fist barraged into the creature's chest over 100 times in the matter of a few seconds. Beams of light cascaded over it, sparkling like stars in the night. The creature spat up blood, which at this point was now glowing and sizzling in the nighttime glow. Its body collided to the ground, now a smoldering pile. Jonathan glanced over to where the other creature, the vampire, had been pulled, and saw that it was still in the air. Its body came down upon a short sword that divided it in half. The vampire was still gargling. It spat curses at the person above it. Do you think, Lord Dio, little... The creature stopped, its eyes widening as it stared back at the figure ahead of it. The light from Jonathan's Sunlight Yellow Overdrive was cascading just slightly over the man's imposing figure, revealing a crest on the back of his clothing. The crest of the Belmont clan. The man twirled his blade in his right hand, swinging it down on top of the creature without looking at him. The vampire's face was divided in two at the jawline, leaving him no longer capable of speaking, let alone biting. I don't know who Dio is, and honestly I couldn't be fucking bothered. The man groaned. You bastards have been poking around every single corner of the continent these days. Whoever your liege lord is, he's a drop in the ocean. The vampire tried to belt out a retort, but he found himself unable to. His tongue waggled futilely in the air. Jonathan found himself stunned by the man's presence. There was something about it that turned, and for the first time Jonathan got a clear look at his face. It was around his age. But where Jonathan's face was full of a kind of hopeful optimism, the man before him's radiated a kind of cynicism that only came when life kicked you around for long enough. But there was still kindness there. Thank you, the boy said after he had finally composed himself for long enough. Thank you, thank you, he kept repeating, looking between the two men as though he were trying to decide which one of them deserved thanks more. Jonathan moved beside the boy, helping him to his feet. The other man just shrugged. If you want to thank me, you can thank me by pointing me towards the next town that actually has people in it. Getting a bit sick of the wilderness out here. The boy paused for a moment, almost like he was hesitant to turn away anybody else. Oh, that's fine. If you don't know, you don't know, the man said as he continued walking away. Wait! Both the boy and Jonathan shouted. He kept walking. Trevor! Jonathan shouted as the man before him stopped. So he was right. The man before him was indeed Trevor Belmont, a boy he hadn't seen since he was little, the descendants of the family that his father had referred to as true nobles, the protectors of all mankind. The radiance that Jonathan saw in that family line back in the day was a lot dimmer now. Trevor turned around, lifting an eyebrow as he did. I don't think I know you, but it's the first time I've been sober in a few days. He scratched the back of his neck. That was hormone, right? Here I thought everyone who knew that technique had gone the way of the dodo. Not everyone, William Zeppeli responded, stepping out from the ruined cityscape. Oh, you have got to be fucking kidding me. Trevor narrowed his eyes. It's been a long time, Trevor. Yeah, sure has. Not since the last time my family dragged your ass out of the fire and you disappeared off the map. Trevor replied back, William eyeing him coolly. You know, after the last time you had an encounter with my family, I seem to remember you saying that you were a true blue friend. Would have been nice to see you around when we were being hunted down, but it's nice to know that friendship has its limits. That's not the whole story, Trevor. Oh, bite me, old man, Trevor spat in response. You made your choice, that's fine, just don't try and justify it to me. Trevor, what happened to you? Jonathan said in response. Trevor glanced back at him once more. This time, his eyes moved towards the spot on Jonathan's neck, at the birthmark showing. Well, shit. Trevor rubbed his eyebrow. Jonathan Joestar, as I live and breathe. What are you doing outside that big mansion of yours? And knowing Harmon, no less. Dio, my brother. Shit, Dio. He glanced down at the vampire he had just decapitated. Is your brother? Well, here I thought my family was fucked, so congratulations, you take the cake. He could see from Jonathan that he still wanted more from him. He supposed he hadn't answered the question yet. Life happened, Joestar, that's what. Even when people pressed blades to their necks, my family helped, and they kept helping, and it got them killed. Not much of a story, is it? He asked, shrugging. So, you're the last of the Belmonts. Trevor smiled wryly. Not a very impressive last man standing, I know, but fate can be a bitch like that. I'm the last of the Joestars, Jonathan responded almost immediately. Trevor tensed in surprise for a second. Yeah, like I said, fate's a bitch. But we're still honoring our families, Jonathan argued. We're still keeping our families' memories alive by fighting out here to keep people safe. Trevor shrugged. The place was on my way. Just happened to see the kid and I got involved. Don't read too much into it. You'll hurt your head. Trevor began walking again. Where are you going? Jonathan asked. Down the road, I imagine, until I find a bar with an empty seat that hasn't been overrun by the undead. Then, once I find it, I'm going to drink, he added. Speedwagon watched the interaction between the two. Jonathan Joestar was a gentleman. He was a kind man who never let power or money corrupt him, fought for nothing more than the right for others to see a brighter tomorrow. And even when he lost his family, his father, he never lost that light inside of him. Trevor Belmont, on the other hand, seemed like a bitter old man in a young man's body. Venom and apathy filled a lot of his words. He was just about the farthest thing from a gentleman that Speedwagon had seen in a while, and Speedwagon was the leader of a gang. But there was still something inside of him, a small fragment of light, shining the same righteousness that he saw within Jonathan. Please, don't go, the little boy beside Speedwagon said between sobs. Both Jonathan and Trevor met the child's eye. William Zeppeli just seemed to be watching the whole situation, like he was waiting for something. Please, I need your help. He was crying so much it was hard for anybody to get an understanding of what he was saying. Look, kid, you're safe now, Trevor replied. No creatures out this far back. At least not any more of them. There wouldn't be a point. There's nothing to eat. Jonathan shook his head at Trevor's rather blunt statement, but he did his best to agree with it for the boy's sake. The boy shook his head. He began rambling. His mouth was going faster than most people could probably pick up. About the only thing Trevor had managed to pick up was that the boy's name was Poco. His mouth was going faster than most people could probably pick up. About the only thing Trevor had managed to pick up was that the boy's name was Poco. Outside of that, he couldn't get a single word from him. Finally, the boy managed to slow himself down. My sister. Trevor understood basically all there was to say in that sentence. Sighed deeply. Just wanted to go get a drink. All he had to do was turn around and go, and he could go drink. Just take a few steps away. Just a few steps. Damn it all to hell. Which way? He asked. The boy looked up to him. As did Speedwagon. As did Jonathan. And finally, William Zeppeli. The last member of that group had a smile on his face from ear to ear. Even on its weakest legs, the Belmont family hadn't changed all that much. Come on now, boy. Don't leave me in suspense. Which way is the city? Trevor asked again. The boy pointed forward. At least I was going that way anyway. Trevor grumbled as he kept walking. The boy ran to his side, walking alongside him. Aren't you like 8 years old? I'm 10, Paco corrected. Right, yeah, since bringing a 10-year-old into a war zone is a better idea. Trevor continued. I can't abandon her, he replied. Trevor glanced over at the resolute face of the young man and shrugged. I might not be able to protect you, kid. Not to mention to split my focus, Trevor said back. Not if you have other people watching your side, Jonathan responded. Trevor hadn't even realized that he and his posse were following him, especially not that closely. This might be faster if I travel alone, Trevor argued. Oh, don't be daft, William replied. The only thing that would happen if you traveled alone would be you dying alone, and then who would get the poor lad's sister? He asked. Trevor slumped his shoulders. Fine, whatever, but we part as soon as this nonsense is done with, Trevor said, William smiling internally. He didn't know much about the future, but he did know what fate had in store for their little party. And he knew that Trevor Belmont wouldn't be parting from them anytime soon. Up, fellow nerds. As you can see, I'm back and with a new look. I spent a lot of time designing this avatar, and I'm really happy with getting to show it off a little bit. As you probably also noticed, the channel banner is a little bit different. I decided to update it a little bit. I think these changes just make things a little bit better, and I hope you guys like them. It was really awesome to introduce you guys to another corner of Earth OCU. As always, I really appreciate you guys being here. And also, a special thing, you might notice that I uploaded a bit earlier than I normally do. Like I said, I'm trying to upload things more, since I'm at a period in the year where I'm a little less busy. So hopefully you guys get more content. As for the series you guys just watched, I want to just make a couple of things clear real quick before I let you go. The main thing I wanted to bring up real quick is that for Castlevania, I'm primarily working off of the Netflix anime. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and I know that in later seasons it differs a lot from the story of the games. So I just want to be as upfront as possible to let people know that the anime is my main inspiration here. That is the main timeline I'm taking from. So don't expect a ton of stuff from the Castlevania games. I am kind of trying to figure out how to work certain people from the games into the universe's extended lore because, yes, I am thinking further into the later JoJo parts. But for the purposes here, Castlevania anime is the main source of inspiration. Also, something you probably noticed by now is that there's a large shift in the Castlevania timeline. Trevor, in the original anime, lived in the 1300s, but here, he's alive in the 1800s. This of course means that as we get to later Belmonts in the timeline, some of them will be taking place in more modern settings, which I am very excited to get to. Finally, this last part, which I'm not going to get into as much, is that Hamon from JoJo's is going to be buffed quite a bit. You probably won't even notice it in this part, but I am trying to keep Hamon around for later parts, especially because with Castlevania, I'm trying to keep the series a little bit more focused on vampires. So, you'll notice Hamon being more useful in a few different ways as the series goes forward. One of which I am very excited to do. So, if you like this video, then please let me know by leaving a like. I really appreciate you guys spending any of your time here, so thanks for taking this journey with me. And if you want to continue this journey with me, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future installments of this or any other series that I publish in the future. Up next, we're moving back to Arcane Fantasy, which if you don't know mainly follows Spider-Man in the Arcane series, where we'll get to check out Peter and Echo finally exploring their powers for the first time. In the meantime, I've been your captain, and it's been a pleasure to take you on another tour of the strongest Earth in the multiverse. I'll see you around!